and then completed his PhD research at Marquette University in Wisconsin. His research focuses on plants and animal communities, particularly looking at succession, looking at how places like abandoned farmland change to forest, and how plants and animals interact to help those interactions in terms of succession, such as seed dispersal. And I'm sure he's going to explain to everyone a lot more about what that means, and looking at biodiversity in the forest where he is in Panama. So this is very exciting to have someone joining us from outside the US today to share his research and work with our community here in New Haven. So with that brief introduction, and it's 10:05, I think we should get started.
Excellent. All right. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Perfect. All right. So thank you, Colleen, for the introduction. I'm really happy to talk to you all today. I hope you're doing well, that you're staying healthy and sane through these really unusual times. As Colleen said, my name is Sergio Estrada Villegas. I'm a postdoctoral fellow at the School of Forestry and Environmental Studies. And Colleen asked me to talk to you today about trees and biodiversity. So I took that theme and kind of went into two different directions. And so I have two stories to tell you today. But so before we get into those two stories, as she said, I'm talking from Panama. So here in this map of North America and the northern portion of South America, we can see where New Haven is. And I think most of you are right around New Haven. This is where Panama is. And Panama is at the very tip of Central America. Panama borders Costa Rica on the northwest and Colombia on the southeast. And I'm here in Panama because I want to study how forests recover after farmers abandon their fields. So as Colleen said, I study different processes around succession. So don't be surprised if you hear the background some birds and insects. It's because I live right next to the rainforest. Okay, so when we think of a tree, I think if all of us just close our eyes, I think we can come up with a very similar idea what a tree looks like. So this is a forest from New England. And so when we think of a tree, we think of a trunk, usually quite slender and tall. It can have a lot of foliage at some portion of the year. And if we come to the tropics, a tree looks almost kind of the same, right? There's a big trunk, there's foliage in the canopy. They also have fruits and flowers at some portion of the year. But again, if we all close our eyes and think of a tree, I think most of us can picture a tree, right? And we have a very similar idea what a tree looks like. But what about biodiversity, right? If you close your eyes, if I close my eyes and I said, let's think of a meaning for the word biodiversity, right? Or when we think of biodiversity, what do we exactly mean? So I want to spend a couple of slides talking about the word biodiversity as a ground floor for the stories that I'm going to tell you today. Okay, so the etymology or the origin of the word biodiversity is very simple. So you can decompose this into two words. Bio, which refers to everything that is alive or has been alive, right? And diversity comes from the Latin diversitas, or a synonym of variatio, right? So with these two words, the classic textbook definition is that biodiversity is the variety of life at a particular place and time, right? It can be the biodiversity here in Panama, or it can also be the biodiversity, say, 1 million years ago. But biodiversity has very important subtleties that we need to keep in mind. So let me ask you a question. What is the variety of mushrooms that you see in this group of mushrooms here? Somebody just wants to shout a number? Okay, I'm sure that exactly. So you're gonna say 4, right? There are 4 types of mushrooms, okay? We as scientists, when we identified a type, we usually call them a species. So from now on, I'm just gonna be using types and species interchangeably. So again, how many species of mushrooms do we see? We see 4, right? The yellow one, the orange one, the purple one, and the brown one. Okay, how about this other group? How many species of mushrooms do we have in this group? Again, we see 4 types of mushrooms, okay? But there is something different, right? In the top group, we see that most of them are the yellow mushrooms. But in the bottom group, we see that the quantity of mushrooms per type of mushroom has changed. So in the top group, we had 1 orange mushroom, and the bottom one, now we have 5 orange mushrooms. So in terms of biodiversity, it really depends what we're talking about. If I'm asking you, what is the number of species, right? Both groups have 4 mushrooms, but the bottom group is actually more biodiverse because there's more individuals per type of mushroom. Okay, so with this in mind, let's start to dig in a little bit deeper on the 2 stories I'm going to tell you today. So when we ecologists, what do we do when we try to study biodiversity? When we do study biodiversity, the first thing that is crucial is we want to quantify biodiversity. And this is very important, especially here in the tropics, because forests are being lost very quickly due to deforestation. So we want to go and see, for example, I go to this forest right here and I said, okay, there's a brown tree and there's some palms and there's some vines. So I can count how many of those I find. But I think we want to go, as ecologists, we want to go further, and we want to understand how the biodiversity of a group of organisms might affect the biodiversity of other organisms, right? We want to look at the interactions among organisms. And so we're not just counting, say, for example, trees. We want to understand, say, how the biodiversity of trees might be affecting other organisms, maybe in a positive way, maybe in a negative way, maybe in a neutral way. And so we as scientists, as ecologists, when we study biodiversity, that's what we are aiming for. And so having said that, I'm going to tell you 2 stories. The first story I'm going to tell you is how tree biodiversity contributes to the biodiversity of other organisms, right? And the second story is how animal biodiversity contributes to tree biodiversity, okay? So again, the theme is trees and biodiversity, but I want to branch out, right? And I want to bring your mind from New England, beautiful spring New England, to the tropics and show you some pictures and talk a little bit about trees, biodiversity of other organisms, and animals as well, okay? So are we ready? Great, cool. So here we go. So this is a beautiful picture of a tropical lowland forest about 1 kilometer away from where I live. As you can see, there are different types of trees, right? We can see some trees that don't have any leaves because this picture was taken in the dry season. We can also see there are trees with dark green leaves, some orange leaves. There's some yellow trees with yellow flowers in the background, right? There's a lot of type of trees. There's a lot of species of trees here in Panama. There are about 2,300 species of trees in Panama. And in comparison, in North America, so US and Canada, there are 1,000 species of trees. And as you saw on the map, Panama is really small compared to the United States. So the difference in the number of species is really remarkable, okay? But I wanna zoom in into this forest. Like I wanna take a camera and just kind of start looking closer and closer into that forest, okay? So if we look even closer, we see a lot of branches and a lot of trunks, right? Not only we see the leaves, but we start seeing there's big trunks and there's a lot of surface that is made out of trunks and branches. And if we zoom further in, and we keep just zooming in into a tropical forest, this is what we see. We see that we have a tree, but on top of the tree, we have plants growing on top of the tree. So smaller plants that are growing on the branches and the trunks. And these plants are called epiphytes. An epiphyte is just simply a plant that grows on top of another plant. And epiphytes are really interesting and really cool because they can do their whole life cycle growing on the tree, right? They germinate, they grow, they reproduce and die, always up there in the canopy. They never come to the ground. They never send roots to the ground. They live always up there. And so in this picture, I'm showing you ferns, right? I guess some of you have seen ferns in the forest. There are ferns in New England that you can see growing on the ground in gardens. And they're really, really beautiful. So ferns is one type of epiphytes. And there are other type of epiphytes here in the tropics of Central and South America. One of them is called bromeliad. Bromeliads are these beautiful rosettes. They're really thin, slender leaves. They usually have a little tank of water. There's other orchids as well. It's a typical epiphyte, and I'm sure that some of you have seen them in gardens, in people's houses. Also, we have aroids. People have them as well in New England in indoors, and they usually have heart-shaped leaves, and they have really beautiful patterns like in this picture. And so epiphytes groups for other groups of plants: bromeliads, aroids, orchids, and ferns. Okay, so when we talk about aroids, I talk them all as a group, and then later on, we're going to talk a little about them specifically. Okay, so how do biologists study epiphytes? So one way is that you go, get a bunch of climbing gear, go up, get up to the forest, and collect the leaves. But a more unconventional way is to use a construction crane. So in this picture, we have the tropical lowland rainforest, and you have a construction crane, right? The Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute here in Panama has two construction cranes, and one of them is this one right here in the tropical wet forest. And so this is phenomenal because people can get into the gondola, go up into the forest and study the epiphytes or many other aspects of the forest, but in this case, epiphytes going to the very smallest tip, thinnest branch of the forest, right? If you were climbing on a tree, you can't get to the very tip of the tree, right? But with a crane, you can access this very isolated spots of a tree. And so I'm going to tell you about two studies that were conducted about epiphytes on this crane. So this first study, they went up and they started to count the different species of epiphytes on the forest below the crane. So this area is 1 acre, and they found 103 species of epiphytes in just 1 acre of forest. This is outstanding. Remember, the name of just the whole biodiversity of North America is much different than the forest and the biodiversity of plants here in the tropics. So in comparison, 80% of the plant species that we found in New England are herbs. Here in the tropical rainforest, 30% are trees, 25% are herbs, and 20% are epiphytes. So epiphytes are a huge portion of the biodiversity in a tropical rainforest. Okay, so now we're gonna kind of zoom in here into this forest, and we're gonna imagine ourselves being on that gondola, going up and down the forest and studying the epiphytes across the forest profile, from the bottom of the forest to the highest portion of the forest. Okay, so Peter and collaborators in 2006 did a really cool study, and let me walk you through this graph. Okay, so in the gondola, on the crane, they wanted to study how different environmental variables were affecting the biodiversity of epiphytes, right? So on this figure, we have a y-axis that goes from 0 to 40. That's 0 meters to 40 meters. 0 meters is ground level, and 40 meters is the very top of the canopy, right? So this is a height of the forest. This is the forest profile from 0 to 40 meters, okay? And they started to measure different variables across that forest profile. So for example, they found their air humidity is higher at the bottom of the forest, and lower at the top of the forest, right? The other gradients work in the reverse way, right? You have higher light intensity and higher temperatures on the top of the canopy. And at the bottom of the canopy, you have low light intensity and lower temperatures and low wind speed. So this creates this kind of opposite gradients of environments. And as you can start picturing, there's different little microclimates across this forest profile, right? At the bottom is moist and a little bit dark. And as you go up is a little bit less moist and lighter and maybe hotter, okay? So this tropical rainforest, really diverse in trees, is creating this gradient of microclimates. And now we're gonna see how those microclimates are affecting epiphytes. So in this rest of the picture, let me walk you through this very slowly. We're gonna focus on, this is the height distribution of the 4 taxonomic groups that I mentioned about epiphytes, right? And we're gonna focus on the white bars, the number of species of each group of epiphytes. So we have aroids, bromeliads, orchids, and ferns, okay? Again, we're gonna focus only on the white bars. And the first thing that we can see is that aroids, bromeliads, and ferns are usually more diverse. Their biodiversity is greater on the bottom half of the forest, right? We find most species of aroids, bromeliads, and ferns below 20 meters, okay? So they're usually associated with more humidity, a little bit darker, whereas orchids, you find them above 20 meters. Most of the species of orchids are above 20 meters. So this is telling us 2 very important things. First, that the forest, across its profile, across the forest height, there are different microenvironments, microclimates, and these microclimates are used in a differential way by different epiphytes. So the biodiversity of trees is creating this amazing profile of environmental variables, and this is contributing to the biodiversity of other organisms, in this case, epiphytes, right? In different groups of epiphytes, right? And so, for example, let me show you this beautiful picture taken by Christian Ziegler. Most of the pictures I'm showing you today is by this phenomenal German photographer, Christian Ziegler. And this picture was taken on one of those trees and on the gondola of that crane. And this orchid, the flower has about 5 millimeters long. It's really, really tiny. And so the biodiversity can be at very grand scales at the size of the tree and the trunks, but also can be really, really tiny. We're talking about very, very small plants. Okay. So I want to also now make the exercise that we're zooming out from this 1 acre of forest underneath this crane, and we're going to zoom out. We're going to see the whole world again. Okay. And so this is a map of forest height. Okay. Basically, the blue colors are showing us forests that are very short, right? And in red and orange, we have forests that are really, really tall. And this is the map of the whole world, okay? So you can recognize where Central America is and South America. And as you can see, the forests in this part of the world are really tall on average, right? Let's see how is that related to to plant biodiversity. So here's another map. Here on this map on the right, we have plant biodiversity across the world. And in blue, we have areas with low plant biodiversity, and in red, areas with high plant biodiversity. If we overlap those maps, right, one on top of the other, we see there's a really good match between forest height and plant biodiversity. What I'm saying is this: in areas where trees are taller, when the forest is taller, we have more plant biodiversity. And so the example that I just showed you is about epiphytes, right? So our conclusion is this: forests, when they are taller, they usually have more plant biodiversity, including epiphytes. So orchids and ferns and bromeliads, they're more diverse in areas when tropical forests are taller. Okay, so to wrap this up, we can say that tree biodiversity contributes to epiphyte biodiversity. Tropical trees are bigger, they're taller, they have more bark. They usually have different kinds of barks as well. And that's used by epiphytes in a different way. Bigger trees have more surface for epiphytes to establish. But also taller trees and tropical trees create a variety of microhabitats where different organisms can live, right? So remember that picture, when we have different profiles of different microhabitats, epiphytes can use them and they can live there, they can thrive, and they can be more diverse. But when I was looking at information for this talk, I was amazed by the impact of plant diversity, not only on epiphytes, but on other organisms. So let's see how tree biodiversity contributes to the biodiversity of many other organisms besides epiphytes. So let's look, for example, at amphibians, frogs, toads, salamanders. And let's look at this map. Okay, on the background of the big map, we have, again, Central and South America. And in red, we have the areas with high amphibian biodiversity, right? When we have more kinds of frogs and more kinds of salamanders. And in red, this area is where we have more, and blue is when we have lower. And if we overlay that map with our map of plant biodiversity, we see that it's a really good match. In areas where there is more plant biodiversity, we have higher amphibian biodiversity. What about birds? What about this beautiful toucan and the birds in Central and South America? Same story, right here. Again, a map of South America and Central America, in red, areas with high bird biodiversity. And if we look again at the small map of plant biodiversity, if we overlap them, there's a really good match, right? In areas where we have high plant biodiversity, we also have high bird biodiversity. Okay, let's go to another area of the world, right? So I don't want you to believe this is only a phenomenon that happens in Central and South America. Let's go somewhere else. So let's talk about, for example, mammals and our closest relatives. Let's talk about primates. So we're going to go to Southeast Asia, Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand, and let's look at these beautiful monkeys. This is a beautiful long-tailed macaque with this beautiful little pup right there. This really curious leaf monkey, and the unmistakable orangutans, right? All in Southeast Asia. So again, the background on the map is telling us about mammal biodiversity. We can see Borneo and the islands of Java and Sumatra. And I'm pointing that out on a red circle in our map of plant biodiversity. Again, if we overlay those maps, if we put mammal biodiversity on top of plant biodiversity, we see a really perfect match. Basically, mammals, and particularly primates, are more diverse in areas where we have more plant biodiversity. Okay, so I hope right now I've convinced you that when we have high plant biodiversity, we also have high biodiversity of other organisms. So in other words, tree biodiversity contributes to the biodiversity of other organisms in different ways, right? The example I showed you is that in tropical forests, because they're tall and because they have different barks and because there are many species of trees, it benefits epiphytes. But there's many ways in that can happen with other groups of organisms. Okay, let me have a sip of water. Okay, so that was one story. How about the other story? How about animals, how animals contribute to tree biodiversity? Okay, but to talk about animals, we need to go back to the tree, okay? All right, so let's picture this tree and it's fruiting season. So in yellow, I am showing fruits, of course, and inside of the fruits, we have the seeds. By just pure logic, most of the fruits are gonna land underneath the parental tree, right? If you have gone to an orchard of any type, apples, for example, most of the apples are gonna land below the parental tree, right? So this is what I'm depicting right here. Okay, some of the seeds might die. A lot of them are going to germinate, and we're going to have a lot of seedlings under the parental tree, right? They're all agglomerated right around the parental tree. And what happens when you have a lot of organisms in one location? Something very similar to what is happening to today, right now to us, right? We're prone to get infected by pathogens if we're all agglomerated, if we're all grouped in one place at the same time. And that happens as well for seedlings. Seedlings underneath the parental tree get infected more often than seedlings that are away from the parental tree. So here I'm just showing this little skull, just saying all the seedlings, the majority of the seedlings growing underneath the parental tree are going to die. They're going to get infected by soil pathogens and other sources or other ways, and they're going to die. So let's transform this information that we've seen in the forest in terms of a graph, right? So on red, I'm showing this graph of seedling mortality, and on the horizontal axis, I'm showing distance from the tree. Again, the seedlings closer to the parental tree are going to die because they're just all agglomerated and growing underneath the parental tree. But what happens to the seedlings away from the parental tree? They're going to survive more. There's probability of survival is greater for those seedlings away from the parental tree, okay? But hold on a second. So how do those seeds got away from the parental tree? How do they move? I mean, they don't have any legs and just like start walking and getting whatever they want. Plants don't move that way, right? Seeds need to be moved so seedlings can survive. And this is when animals come into the picture. Animals are crucial. They're very, very important because animals consume the fruits, right? They move them away from their parents. And by moving the seeds away from their parents, they're contributing to the survival of the seedlings, and they're helping to replenish the population of trees and plants over time, okay? So this is when animals and trees are combined, and animals are helping the tree communities to survive and to reach other areas. Oh, I'm sorry, somebody's cutting the grass outside, and I hope that it's not overtaking my voice. Can you hear me well still? Yeah?
We can hear you.
I'm actually gonna close the window. Hold on a second.
And I'll just encourage everyone to feel free to ask questions of Sergio. You can use the chat box. I failed to say that to you at the start of his session, so.
Yeah, feel free to interrupt me at any point. Okay, right, and so animals are crucial. Animals are very, very important. If it wasn't for the animals moving fruits and seeds away from the parental tree, there's be greater mortality, and that will have compounded effects, right? And so I want to take this concept of animals moving seeds into a scenario like this, right? Imagine that Sergio has a plot of land in the tropical rainforest, and I say, I'm going to cut this forest and I'm going to have some crops for some years, right? And so here you can have half this rainforest and half that forest is gone. And I'm going to use this plot of land for a couple years until I exhausted all the nutrients in the soil, or I just moved to the city, different reasons why abandoning this plot of land. How is the forest going to regenerate in this plot of land? And we know that plants don't walk, right? We don't see trees walking on the street, but we know already that those seeds are going to be moved from the forest to other areas thanks to animals. I don't see any questions so far. Okay. Animals are the ones that are going to be able to transport the seeds from the forest to areas where forest has been gone for years or decades. And so I'm going to show you some pictures of the most important animals that are able to move fruits and seeds from the forest outside of the forest. And the first ones are bats. this is a beautiful picture of a bat with a fruit on its mouth, okay? Bats are phenomenal at moving seeds from the forest into other areas. They're really great flyers. They can carry big loads on their mouths, and they grab their, oh, there's an animal right there. Hey, dog. So bats grab their fruits, they fly to other places, they gnaw the fruit, they eat the fruit, and they might spit the seed, or they might swallow the seed and later defecate the seed, poop the seed. And these seeds are going to start germinating and producing the first trees that are going to start reconquering this area that was devoid of trees. This is another picture of a bat flying away with that fruit in his mouth. And after bats and after small birds, they come bigger birds, like toucans, for example, right? They eat the seeds of larger trees, and they're able to swallow them. And when they fly to other areas, they poop them, and these seeds away from their parents are going to germinate, and they're going to grow, and they're going to start replenishing the forest. And after bats and birds, we have mammals. We have terrestrial mammals, and we have arboreal mammals like monkeys. In this picture here, I'm showing you an agouti, which is a big ground rodent. And as we know, rodents and squirrels, right? They grab seeds and they go and they bury them. They cache those seeds for a later supper or dinner, right? By moving the seed away from that palm, which is right behind the rump of the agouti, they're helping dispersing the seeds, is moving away those fruits away from the parental tree. And sometimes agouti forget those seeds, and those seeds germinate, and those seedlings are going to prosper, and they're going to help the regeneration of the forest. Okay, so now I've shown you how animals are contributing to plants, and in a specific scenario, how animals are helping forest regeneration by moving seeds from the forest to areas that don't have any forest anymore. So to wrap this second story, animal biodiversity contributes to tree biodiversity. Seeds need to be moved away from the parent trees so seedlings can survive. Different kinds of animals, animal biodiversity, right? We have birds, different kinds of birds. We have bats, we have ground mammals, arboreal mammals. They move the seeds into abandoned farmland at different times. And forest regeneration depends greatly on animals moving seeds into areas that are devoid of trees, and they help forest regeneration.
Sergio, okay, before you go to the next story, I wonder if you could respond to this question from Cora, asking whether humans also spread the seeds.
Depends on the context, right? Right? We can certainly do disperse seeds, right? Indigenous communities, say in Amazonia or in Central Africa, right? When we eat the seeds of a fruit and we swallow them and we poop somewhere else, we would be dispersing seeds as well, right? It doesn't happen in our context because we know where the poop goes, right? But if we were like any other regular animal in the rainforest, we would be dispersing seeds as well, right? There's no doubt about that. Yeah. So actually, I'm pretty close to finishing because I showed you two stories, right? One story was how tree biodiversity contributes to the biodiversity of epiphytes, right? I showed you that the trees are creating different microhabitats, and those microhabitats are affecting the biodiversity of epiphytes. But I also showed that plant biodiversity, and it's highly correlated with the biodiversity of amphibians, birds, and mammals. And the second story I showed you is how animal biodiversity contributes to tree biodiversity and forest regeneration thanks to seed dispersal, right? They move a seed, they move a fruit somewhere else away from the parent tree, and it helps the survival and the replenishment of tree populations. And I think with those two stories, I'll be happy to take any questions and talk about plants, trees, biodiversity, animals, you name it.
Great. Thank you so much, Sergio. I'm going to invite everyone to feel free to either use the chat box or also feel free to just unmute yourself to ask a question directly. But I see here we have one from Chris about how we are using our understanding of plant and animal biodiversity to protect the forest into the future.
That's a very important question. Thank you, Chris. So there's many ways. The part that I'm studying right now is how different groups of animals are coming and going as the forest is regenerating, right? So at the beginning, when there's no forest whatsoever, my question is, which animals come first, right? Is it the bats? Which kinds of bats? Is it the small birds? Which kinds of small birds, right? Do terrestrial mammals come early or later on, right? And so as we move into the future, I think it's really important for us to understand who's playing a role and when, right? If the bats are doing it first and then the birds, or both simultaneously, or everyone at the same time in concert. I think that is very important to know, because we can also start investigating which species of plants they are dispersing, right? Bats might be eating something different, birds might be eating something different, and their mutual work might help the regeneration of the forest in different ways. Or maybe everyone is eating the same, right? And it doesn't really matter who comes first and second or third. So that is very, very important. And then the flip side of that is, say, if we have trees that are alone, that were left and spared by the farmers, are they attracting animals? And there's really good evidence that they do, right? Fruiting trees are going to attract some birds and some bats. But say that the tree is really far away from the next forest patch. Are the animals going to be able to get there? And that is very important, because we need to suggest to farmers, hey, maybe you should leave some trees, right? Maybe you're going to want this piece of land to recover its forest in, say, 20 or 30 years. Maybe it's important that you leave some trees behind. So those things are very important. There's always the interplay between trees and animals as we move forward, as agricultural practices change, as we are also interested in, say, new crops or different ways of how we handle cattle. Those things are crucial for us to understand how we can protect biodiversity, but also, say, have a livelihood for farmers, right? Did I answer your question?
Great, thank you. There's another question from Cora asking, and it's great that you've been both in New Haven, so you know what it's like here. Are there squirrels in the forest where you are now?
There are, but surprisingly, they are not abundant at all. If I see a squirrel, maybe I see it once a week. However, these really tiny ones that I show you, the agoutis, this one's here, I see at least 10 every day, right? And so, right, in some areas of the world, we have lots of squirrels, like in New England. Here, there's not a lot of them, but we have these ground-dwelling rodents, agoutis, that are really, really abundant. So yes, we have squirrels, but they're not as numerous as they are in New Haven.
Oh, awesome. And then your next question is, did you see this creature firsthand?
Which creature?
In the slide.
Oh yeah, of course.
Agouti. Yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean, they're right here. I mean, on my backyard, I see them from right here from this window. I can see them right there, looking for seeds on this mango tree that I have in front of my house. Yeah, I mean, all these animals that I've shown you, I've seen them. Like amazing. I've seen bats firsthand. The toucans come across the street over there to get seeds on a palm. I've seen the ñecas every day. So yeah, I see them every day.
That's amazing. I don't see another in the chat box right now, but I have a question. You talked a lot about the seed dispersal of trees by birds and bats and other creatures. Is the same true for epiphytes?
That's a great question. That's a very great and insightful question. The answer is yes and no. Typical in biology, right? Epiphytes different kinds of epiphytes produce different kinds of fruits. So for example, some bromeliads actually produce fruits that are eaten by birds, but other bromeliads actually produce really tiny seeds that are taken by the wind, right? Aroids, some species of aroids are loved by bats. Bats love them. And so they're dispersed by bats. Orchids are a completely different story, right? The seeds of orchids are dispersed only by wind, right? So we have this really intricate relationship between different groups of plants and their dispersers. So in general, epiphytes are either wind dispersed, like most orchids and some bromeliads, or they're animal dispersed, like aroids and some bromeliads as well.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I know we're at 10:45, and I think we might be right out of time because I know the students have to go to their next classes, but I wonder if anyone has a final question. If not, we can thank our speaker and our expert today, Sergio, for sharing the tropics with us and being able to see. It's so exciting for us to be able to see what the forest is like there and really help understand better this intricate relationship of why biodiversity really relies, both the plant community relies on other parts of life, as well as how all mammals, birds, bats, and other creatures also, like ourselves, rely on the plant community. Is there any last question? I think if not, Anna will be posting the recording so that the teachers can go through also the recording with their students again. We have one more question.
Sure.
Yes, do you see in the chat, when people deforest that area, what do they do with the plants when they clear the forest?
Okay, so depends on the type of wood, right? Some wood is used for build houses, right? Is used for construction. Other wood is used just for firewood. And other big portion of the wood is left there to rot. So, and in some cases, actually, it's just left there and it's burnt, right? And so it really depends, but it's usually some portion is for construction, but the other is just left there to rot or burn as they clear the fields to, say, sow maize, corn or beans or cattle, and then years later the forest will come back, and that's thanks to animals.
Yeah. Well, as Cora has said, that is so sad. It is terribly sad, but you give us hope, Sergio, with your research about how the forest can recover and how we can share that learning with farmers. It's really amazing research, and we're so grateful that you could share it with us today.
Oh yeah, anytime. And here is my email. If one of the teachers has any questions, feel free to email me and I'll be happy to talk a little bit further about any specific topics.
Thank you. And everyone, we have next week, it'll be our final speaker, and that will be Skylar Borden will be sharing with us about trees in New Haven and trying to understand the ecosystem services they provide to our community here. So we hope you will join us again next Thursday at 10 for our final session. And thank you, Sergio. We will stay in touch.
Yeah, thank you all. Have a good day. Stay healthy.
Bye. Yeah, bye everyone.
Bye-bye.